A knock at the door. A 19-year-old girl is standing on the porch. Her hair is half braided. She has no criminal record. The night before, she had been smoking marijuana. Something inside her has changed since then. Her own family does not yet know she is missing. She asks for a glass of water. The man inside is 68. He is a pastor. He is a hospital chaplain. He has spent his entire life opening doors for strangers. So he opens this one too. What happens next will become the bloodiest crime scene in Raleigh County history. Detective Morgan Bragg would later describe it in one sentence.
The only thing that he did that led to his death was open the door to a stranger.
She had never met him. There was no motive. There was no connection. By sundown, his entire home would be evidence. To understand what was lost on February 7th, 2015, you have to understand who Ron Browning was. And to understand that, you have to understand a small town in southern West Virginia where for almost 5 decades, one man kept showing up. Ronald Lee Browning was 68 years old. He was born and raised in Beckley, West Virginia, a small mountain town tucked into Raleigh County where everyone seemed to know everyone. Out of high school, Ron enlisted in the United States Army. He served his country. Then he came home and never left again. What Ron did with the rest of his life was simple. He helped people. That was the entire shape of it. For years, he served as a chaplain at Raleigh General Hospital. That meant he sat at the bedsides of strangers in the hardest moments of their lives. He held the hands of patients who had just received bad news. He prayed with families in waiting rooms at 3 in the morning.
Ronald Browning was an incredible person. He was a family man. He had a wife and family that loved him very much. He was a local pastor of a church. He volunteered at a local hospital, and he had a lot of people that loved him.
When he was not at the hospital, he was at Cool Ridge Community Church. Ron was the pastor there for many years. He preached every Sunday. He stood at the back door after every service, asking each member by name how their week had been. If someone was sick, he visited them. If someone was struggling, he showed up at their house.
There was a lot of things said about Ron, what a great guy he was, and how giving he was.
Ron was not a famous man. He was not a wealthy man. He drove a normal car. He lived in a small house on Odessa Avenue. But he was the kind of man who collected people the way other people collect hobbies. Late in life, after years of being alone, Ron found something he never expected. He found love again. Her name was Roxana. They had known each other for 14 years through the hospital where she had worked before they finally began dating. They were married in the same church where he preached. The wedding was small. The cake was made by her niece. The bridal party wore pink and white. Ron held her hand at the altar. They had been married for 9 months.
Ron was a very generous husband. He would do anything that I asked him to do.
Ron had a brother too. His name was Ralph. The two of them had grown old together, close in the way only brothers can be after a lifetime of standing beside each other. They went fishing together. They went to church together.
As usual, a good time together. And when I got the call, I mean, it was shocking to hear.
They had been each other's witnesses for almost 70 years. 2 days before everything fell apart, Ralph and Ron went fishing. It would be the last time they spoke. If you had asked anyone in Cool Ridge, anyone in the hospital, anyone in the church, anyone in his family to describe a single enemy Ron Browning had made in 68 years of life, no one would have been able to answer. He had none. Saturday morning, February 7th, 2015, began like every Saturday in the Browning house. Roxana was driving her mother out to a family reunion at her cousin's house. Ron was staying home. He was going to study his Bible. Before she left, Roxana stopped at the doorway. She kissed her husband. She told him she loved him. She told him she would be back that evening.
On February the 7th, I kissed him and told him I loved him and told him goodbye. I was going to take my mom out to her cousin's house.
She drove away. What neither of them knew was this. Ron always called Roxana 2 or 3 times whenever she was out. Every single time. He would call to check on her. He would call to tell her he loved her. He would call for no reason at all.
He always calls me 2 or 3 times a day when I'm out like that, and he didn't that day.
Roxana would not realize anything was wrong for several hours. By the time she did, the phone she was waiting for would never ring again. A few miles from the Browning home, in a different house in Beckley, a 19-year-old girl sat still while her mother braided her hair. It was an ordinary morning in an ordinary house. There was nothing in that moment that would have warned anyone what was about to happen. Her name was Camille Brown. Her family knew her as a college student attending West Virginia University. Her family was wrong. Without telling them, Camille had dropped out months earlier. She was working at a gentleman's club in another city. Her parents continued to send her tuition money. Camille continued to take it. None of them knew the daughter sitting in that chair that morning was already living a life her family did not recognize.
One of the things that we discovered is that she had kind of been leading a double life.
Camille had no criminal record. She had no history of violence. The night before, she had smoked a marijuana cigarette. Beyond that, in every report investigators would later compile, she was a young woman with no past, no warning signs, no enemies, no obvious reason for what she was about to do. Her mother stepped out of the room for a moment. When she came back, Camille was gone. Her phone was still sitting where she had left it. Her mother called the Beckley Police Department and filed a missing persons report. She was worried. She did not yet know how much. Around the same time, on Odessa Avenue, there was a knock at Ron Browning's door. Ron walked across his living room. He answered the door, the way he had answered every door for 68 years. The young woman on his porch said she was thirsty. She asked for a glass of water. What happened next is something investigators would later describe with one word.
Much severe trauma. That's typically what we would consider to be overkill. Typically somebody that's perpetuated by somebody that knows the victim.
It just suggested there was something a little more spontaneous that went on. But at the same time, there's a lot of passion and anger involved in it.
We will tell you what Roxana saw when she came home. It was around 5:30 in the afternoon. She'd been gone all day, driving her mother to and from the family reunion. On the passenger seat sat a cake. The car windows were starting to fog with the cold. Something had felt wrong for hours.
He always calls me 2 or 3 times a day when I'm out like that, and he didn't that day.
She pulled into the driveway. The first thing she noticed was the smell of gasoline in the air. She climbed the porch steps with a cake in her hands. The front door was ajar. She pushed it open and walked through it. She went into the kitchen first to set the cake down. That was when she saw the hair on the floor. She did not yet understand what it was. She thought it was strange.
Because I had seen hair in the floor.
She laid it gently on Ron's recliner, the way you would set down something that did not belong to you. She called out for her husband. There was no answer. Her dog came around the corner. The dog was trembling. Roxana had lived with that dog for years. She had never seen the dog like this. She turned toward the living room.
And that's when I turned around and I seen Ron laying in the floor.
The first officer through the door, when he arrived, did what every first officer is trained to do. He cleared the house room by room, looking for a killer who might still be inside. He moved through every floor of the home. What he found in the basement was a metal gas can. The killer had poured gasoline along the floor. They had been trying to set the house on fire, to burn Ron, to burn the evidence, to burn the entire crime to the ground.
The crime scene at Ronald Browning's house was probably one of the bloodiest crime scenes in Raleigh County history. The extreme violence that was used left an absolutely chaotic scene, and one that I won't soon forget.
Detective Morgan Bragg arrived at 6 o'clock that evening. He had worked homicides in Beckley for years. He had seen what people do to each other in this town. He thought he had seen everything. He was about to walk into the worst scene of his career.
It's looking really disorganized, and that is a clue to who might be responsible. They might be chaotic, and they might be disorganized themselves.
By the time Bragg crossed the threshold of Ron Browning's living room, 3 things were already true. The killer was no longer inside the house. The killer had left a trail of evidence behind. And somewhere in Beckley that evening, while Bragg was just beginning to understand what he was looking at, the killer was already in the back of another police car, for an entirely different reason. Detective Morgan Bragg and his partner, Deputy Chief David Allard, walked into Ron Browning's house just after 6 in the evening. They had spent careers in this town. They had worked every major homicide Beckley had seen for over a decade. Then they walked through the doorway.
As I arrived at the crime scene, I would have to say I probably saw the most gruesome scene that I have encountered in my career. And what he noticed is a copious amount of blood throughout the residence.
Blood was in the attic. Blood was in the basement. Blood was in the bathroom sinks. Blood was in the showers. Blood was on the curtains in the living room. Blood was inside the refrigerator. Blood had been smeared on a gallon of milk that was sitting on the floor. Blood was in places that did not make sense, places no struggle could explain. Whoever had done this had not just killed Ron. They had pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up there. They had opened drawers. They had used the shower. They had stood at the kitchen sink and washed something off their hands. They had walked through Ron's mail. The killer had spent time inside the house, alone with what they had done. And then, as if killing him had not been enough, they had carried a metal gas can up from the basement and poured gasoline through the lower floor. They had been trying to burn the entire house down. The body, the evidence, all of it. The investigators had a word for the level of violence they were looking at, which is what made the case impossible. Because statistically, the killer should have been someone Ron knew. Someone with a reason. Someone close enough to hate him. Someone who'd been carrying that hatred long enough to do what was done in this house. Ron Browning did not have anyone like that in his life.
My brother was the kind of guy that didn't bother anybody. And it should never happen to him.
Investigators followed every lead anyway. They cleared Roxana first. Her family reunion alibi was confirmed by everyone who had been there. They examined a contractor Ron had recently disagreed with. They looked at every neighbor. They looked at every member of his church. They looked at his phone records. They looked at every name Ron had ever written down in the address book on his nightstand. Nothing. Bragg sat down with the prosecutor, Benjamin Hatfield, and laid out the wall they were facing.
So this case was unique in that at this point in time, we didn't have a motive, we didn't have a rationale, and we didn't know if we needed to connect some dots or there was a connection that we didn't know about.
The crime scene team did notice two unusual things. The first was that whoever did this had been seriously injured during the attack. There was simply too much blood for it all to belong to Ron. Investigators began checking every hospital in the surrounding counties, looking for anyone who had walked in that day with severe lacerations on their hands. The second was something they found tangled underneath Ron's body, mixed with his blood, braided hair pieces, several of them. Profiler Brianna Fox laid out the math behind why investigators were already starting to feel like they were looking for the wrong kind of person.
This is the least likely suspect. First of all, of course, she is a woman, so she's in that 4% of women who kill.
The braided hair did not match a man. The braided hair did not match anyone they had a name for. The braided hair was just a thread without a face attached to it. Hours passed, theories collapsed, coffee cups stacked on desks. The detectives had a victim they loved. They had a scene unlike anything they had ever witnessed in Raleigh County. They had a few strands of someone else's hair mixed with the blood of a man who had no enemies in the world. They had no idea who they were looking for. Then, sometime late that night, two officers were standing near the doorway of the detective bureau. They were saying things out loud just to keep their thoughts moving, frustrated, exhausted, talking through what little they had so far. A patrol officer walked past them. He stopped. Because he had heard 3 sentences he understood before they did. The patrol officer's name does not matter for the story. What matters is what he heard. The detectives in the doorway were saying 3 things. They believed the killer must have been seriously injured during the attack. They believed the killer was probably still in the area. And they had found braided hair pieces tangled underneath the victim's body. Hair that did not belong to Ron. Hair that had been mixed into the blood.
A uniformed patrol officer advised us that he had just recently taken a missing persons report. A worried mother had called the police, had advised them that her adult daughter was in the process of having her hair braided. The mother had left the room for a short period of time. When she returned, the daughter was gone.
The patrol officer told the detectives what he had filed. Then another officer, who had been listening from across the room, spoke up. He said he knew about something else. Earlier that afternoon, in Mabscott, a small town just minutes from where Ron lived, a young woman had been arrested. She had forced her way into 2 homes. She had walked up to an elderly man in the first house and started asking him strange questions. She had moved on to a second family who managed to keep her in the doorway long enough to call police.
She was not in the house and won't leave. But she's going back and forth, very psychotic. Very psychotic.
Okay, and you don't know who this black woman is?
No idea. They don't know. We've never seen her. Y'all got to hurry and get here and get her. She's going to hurt somebody. We can't get her out of the house.
When officers arrived, she had been combative. She had severe lacerations all over her hands.
The 19-year-old female would not have matched the suspect that we would expect to see in such a violent incident as what we encountered.
3 pieces, 1 picture. Bragg and Allard left Beckley Police Department and drove to the hospital where Mabscott PD had taken her. They were skeptical. Everything about the suspect sitting on a hospital gurney went against everything investigators had been trained to look for.
This is the least likely suspect. First of all, of course, she is a woman, so she's in that 4% of women who kill, and she's only a young woman. There's no connection between Camille Brown and Pastor Ron.
She was incoherent. She was combative. The hospital staff had needed 5 or 6 officers just to hold her down long enough to treat her injuries. And she was wearing a jacket. The jacket did not belong to her. It was too big for her. It had a name embroidered on the chest. It was the hospital chaplain jacket from Raleigh General, the same jacket Ron Browning had worn to work for years. Her name was Camille Brown. She had no criminal record. She had no history of violence. She had never met Ron Browning. But before any detective had asked her a single question, she had already confessed.
They had apprehended her and talked to her. As soon as she got in the car, she made the comment she had killed this old gray-headed white man.
The case that had no motive, no suspect, and no connection had cracked open in the doorway of a hallway. On the strength of 3 sentences a patrol officer overheard while walking past, the detectives now knew who killed Ron Browning. They still had no idea why.
Violently in that parking area. And it was a unique situation in that her family arrived at the hospital. So this was the first time they had seen her since they had filed a missing persons report, which led to a very emotionally charged situation.
Camille Brown's full confession came in pieces over the hours that followed her arrest. She told investigators she had walked through the woods that morning. She told them she had knocked on Ron's door asking for a glass of water. She told them she had attacked him with a glass jar of coins from his own living room.
I went south, east, and I went to this man's house.
Okay.
And
Did you know the man?
no,
You didn't know him?
no,
You never seen him before or talked to him or anything?
no.
Okay. So you go to his house, what'd you do then?
I asked him for some water,
Okay.
and he gave me water.
Now what happened from that point? What happened?
I choked him.
Okay.
He said that I had a demon in me.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Okay. And what did you do then?
I proceeded to choke the man. After he fell, he fought and fought and fought and fought.
Fighting with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But something told me to keep going.
Okay.
Don't give up. And I kept pushing and pushing.
Okay. At this point, you had choked him, and then you started fighting on the floor,
glass.
right?
It was glass.
What kind of glass?
A big glass vase with money that was in it.
Okay. Like a change jar kind of? Okay. I've seen people have those. Is that?
And I hit him with it because
The defense argued that Camille had suffered a substance-induced psychotic reaction after smoking marijuana the night before the murder. 2 forensic psychiatric evaluations were conducted. They returned conflicting findings. Prosecutors had no expert who could counteract the defense's mental health testimony.
She is clearly somebody who was in an extremely disturbed and disturbing, dangerous state.
The case never went to trial. In May of 2016, Camille pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and 2 counts of burglary. On October 4th, 2017, she stood in Raleigh County Circuit Court for sentencing. The plea agreement called for 40 years. The judge reduced it on his own to 30. Ralph Browning was given the chance to speak. He looked at the killer who had not once looked at his family during the entire proceeding.
And I told him, in my opinion, that this girl should never be let out of jail.
Camille Brown will be eligible for release before she turns 50. Investigators never determined a motive. They never found a connection between Camille Brown and Ron Browning. They never produced an answer to the question that Ron's family would have to live with for the rest of their lives. Why? But if you ask Ralph Browning today what he wants the world to know about his brother, he will not talk about Camille. He will not talk about the sentence. He will not talk about the unanswered why. He will talk about Ron. No one will ever know why Camille Brown knocked on Ron Browning's door that morning. The motive that investigators looked for in those first chaotic hours never appeared. It was not there to find. It is not somewhere waiting to be uncovered. It was the absence at the center of everything, and the family Ron left behind would have to learn to live around it. The funeral was held at Cool Ridge Community Church, the same church where Ron had preached for years, the same church where he had married Rexana only 9 months before. So many people came that the building could not hold them all. They stood outside in the February cold. They said the same thing about Ron that the entire town had been saying for almost 5 decades, that he would have given them the shirt off his back. Today, Cool Ridge Community Church still stands. The pews still fill on Sundays. So does the family. The hospital where Ron worked for years still has people who remember the sound of his voice in their hardest moments. Patients who were strangers to him until the day he sat down at their bedsides and was not a stranger anymore. Ralph Browning visits his brother's grave often. He is 75 now. He still goes fishing sometimes, but never with the man he used to go with.